What crimes have you got away with that you've perpetrated that you've never admitted before?
Have I got
you must
away
have done
with?
some crimes.
I do like stealing. Well, when I was younger, I used to steal quite a lot. When I was younger, I used to steal mascara, and then I got caught, and I started crying and blamed it on the fact that my granny died 3 years ago. That was quite fun.
So, for the uninitiated, Luisa Omielan is a British comedian who I don't find particularly funny. But in fairness to a lot of people clearly do. She's had 2 critically and commercially successful stand-up tours and is about to start her 3rd. Her joke about the gendered thigh gap has achieved over 3.5 million views on YouTube. She's just made BAFTA's list of breakthrough Brits, and she is currently entertaining the masses Wednesdays on BBC One.
So are you more aware of when you talk to women that you have to be respectful?
No, because personally I thought I've always been like kind of respectful.
Oh man,
Yeah.
one of those.
Yeah, so I didn't. But I mean, I think for others it has.
We like those. No, this is not an old man moment. This is a high five moment. Yay! I'm back in the game. You don't like you go to the gym. Yeah.
Now, there is a very specific reason why my curiosity was piqued enough to watch her new license fee funded show that was billed as part sexy question time, part documentary and part comedy gig. Which is why I rather bravely waded through the entire digital box set, especially on your behalf. I'll get to that specific reason soon enough, but first, to establish the point of this episode in the broader context of this series, I want to reflect on the dual notion that while on the one hand legacy media platforms like the BBC tend to shut out certain types of people with certain types of views, the current media landscape is very much leaning into the notion of providing a platform to all manner of people prepared to say all manner of things along identitarian lines. People prepared to push very personal political notions, decrying all men as somehow toxic and all women as oppressed victims in a man's world. And in my humble subjective opinion, at least, in the brief 30 minutes of Louisa's show on the lives of young women, the BBC manages to do exactly all of those things.
Every single day, women all up and down the country have micro-sexism. Men don't even have to think about it.
Now, in fairness to Auntie, this possibly isn't the worst example I could probably point at. And unlike a lot of other broadcasters, the BBC do have a very specific public service remit, which includes things like aspiring to reflect, represent and serve the entire community, and support learning for young people through educational content, which will encourage them to explore inspiring and challenging new subjects. So presumably the BBC will argue that Politics for Bitches does exactly that sort of thing. But even more than most other media, they also have a statutory duty to provide accurate and impartial information to help people understand and engage with the world around them, contribute to social cohesion, and portray the lives of people in the UK accurately and authentically. And I can't help but feeling that Politics for Bitches fails fantastically on these sort of fronts. To be honest, it doesn't particularly bother me that Auntie clearly has something of a liberal left-leaning bias, or for that matter that Louisa should choose to use her big budget platform to push particularly personal political conspiracy theories onto the young impressionable bitches of Britain. But when such political perspectives are presented without fair challenge, and to a fair extent presented as actual fact, I for one begin to have a bit of a problem. Hopefully you'll understand exactly why when we get to Louisa's quite spectacularly pants down Me Too moment. But to set the scene, please indulge me while I knock some of her more poorly presented conspiracy theories completely out of the park. In a minute, we'll look at a perennial favourite of professional feminists. But first I want to answer a question posed near the very start of the show. It occurred to Louisa during a lovely day out, which was sadly ruined by one niggling little thing.
There's no doubt that life has improved for us women in the last 100 years. I mean, we can vote, we can have careers, we've got better reproductive rights. I mean, we should be grateful, right? What you're speaking to here is the choir. legislation. They're the ones who've got the power to change it. Why the fuck are they not marching?
Yeah, so speaking as an actual bloke who actually intended to join this actual procession, I'm actually very well placed to explain the very noticeable and almost complete actual absence of men. Personally, for me, there were a couple of very significant chill factors that made me think twice about joining the procession, which, by the way, was a publicly funded participation artwork that took place in several British cities on the 10th of June this summer. The piece commemorated the 100th anniversary of the Representation of the People Act, 1918, which granted suffrage to 8 million British women, and was intended as a visual expression of equality, strength, and cultural representation. It was also one of numerous centenary events of that act over the last year to completely write 5 million suffragettes completely out of history. 5 million suffragettes who looked a little bit like me. And this particular event was promoted using just one portrait of a very particular suffragette. And those of us who know our history know that Emmeline Pankhurst was quite a controversial and divisive character within the wider movement to gain universal suffrage for the women and men of Great Britain. For starters, she only campaigned for votes for a very certain class of women, and certainly didn't want riffraff like Louisa getting any sort of say in the affairs of men. And between points of orchestrating letter bomb campaigns or smashing up windows, she even acted as a recruiting sergeant for the British Army by publicly shaming young men, who very often turned out to be enlisted soldiers, taking some well-deserved respite from the horrors of 20th century war, which all in all kind of sticks in the throats a little. But the answer to Louisa's question is entirely more simple, and had she done the tiniest bit of research, she would have found it on the websites to the actual event. Because not only were men explicitly not invited, they were also explicitly told they weren't allowed to attend.
I mean, the atmosphere is incredible. It is really lovely to be part of it. I just wish people that could actually make the change be here and be part of it.
Because as people are becoming increasingly wise to, 21st century feminism isn't so much about equality as it is about empowering an exclusive and exclusionary collective bargaining lobby for a certain class of people. People who can make your life a misery if you're not in their club.
You know, people say you're being objectified, it's demeaning.
I've never felt that in the 5 years that I've worked in this industry. If I'm honest, in the past week, I've probably received some of the worst comments from women applauding this ban than I have ever received in that industry.
What sort of comments?
From feminists?
From women calling themselves feminists, they're not empowering us or supporting us, but they have come out with some derogatory comments. They're insulting our intelligence based on our occupation. They're calling us prostitutes online, which is, you know, it's very upsetting and insulting.
I wore this on my 30th birthday and I've worn it on the darts. There is no difference to what I wear on a night out to what I wear on the darts. I just get paid well for it.
Like you say, the so-called feminists, I don't believe they can call themselves feminists, because to be a feminist, the whole idea is to empower women to make their own choices and do what they want to do. And if you're sat there saying, as a feminist, I don't think you should do this, then actually you're not letting women make their own choices.
Couldn't agree more. I could not agree more.
That's not what feminism actually is. Feminism is not about that. Feminism is about equality. It's about treating men and women the same. This is clearly a situation in which women are treated differently to men. And also, in the name of progress, I mean, we celebrated suffrage this week. 100 years of women women getting the vote. When women were fighting, when the suffragettes were trying to get votes for women, there were women queuing up to say women were not intelligent enough to vote. So there will always be turkeys voting for Christmas.
Okay.
But isn't that our free will to do so? You know, but there's so many women, so many successful women who are business women. I'm a businesswoman. There's women that are barristers, judges, sportswomen, but not everyone aspires to be that level. Some men do not aspire to be that level. What this is about is our freedom of choice in a democratic society being taken away from us.
This is not about the individuals, Piers.
Why aren't they entitled to have the right to do their job?
I do not know a mother of daughters who wants their daughter to grow up to just be judged for what they look like. These might all be fabulously intelligent women.
I think that's a very snobby, condescending,
but in that particular environment, there is no sense in which they are able to display those particular talents. They are there purely because of what they look like.
There is an argument. This has become almost a class war. I think there are lots of mothers out there that would be very proud of their daughters, actually.
I'm sure their mothers are proud of them.
I'm sure they're proud of them. But what happens in these debates?
You were a model. You modelled for years, right? What is the difference between you exercising your right to model in a sexy, glamorous way and these young ladies doing the same thing?
There are male models. It's that simple.
Incidentally, on average, male models get paid considerably less money than female models for considerably like work. But never mind that, let's talk about taxation. Or more specifically, the fact that the mean and mostly male governments are taking some of it directly out of women's pockets every month, simply because they're not prepared to simply bleed on the floor.
It's absolutely outrageous that women have to pay VAT on sanitary products. They're considered to be luxury items. Bizarrely, you don't pay VAT on kangaroo steaks and repairs on your private jet and other really, really obscure things.
3 years ago, Paula brought this issue into the public eye, successfully convincing the government to challenge the EU on it.
I remember when I said the word vagina in the House of Commons, later on that day, a male MP came up to me and he said, "Did you have to say that word? It's in the dictionary."
Vagina, vagina. Guess what, bitches? We all have vaginas.
Louisa's complaint about sexist taxation laws quickly extended to the high streets and a discussion about the so-called pink tax that ended with her sticking it to the man by rearranging price stickers while having a cosy chat with a Labour MP. And by man, I suppose I more accurately mean a small business trader in London of an unspecified gender who, statistically speaking, is probably a woman. Louisa's account of the dastardly tampon tax happens to work as an effective illustration of why it is that so many people tend to distance themselves from the problematic feminist brand. And for anyone not paying proper attention, and the deliberately disingenuous, people don't generally recoil from modern feminism because they secretly hate women, or for that matter because they don't necessarily often agree with some of the simplest things that feminists frequently say. Indeed, as often as not, the problems people have with feminists tend to start with what they specifically don't say and why they won't say it. Allow me to illustrate.
And to pay for the privilege of, I will not bleed all over your floor because I am not a dog. I'm going to buy tampons and I'm going to pay tax on tampons to keep your floor clean because that's the kind of nice lady I am. 5% we pay on tampons and sanitary, 5% tax we pay on them, right? Do you know how much money they collected in tampon tax last year? Have a wild guess.
Now, it's true that only women bleed red a few days in every month, but among the numerous things Louisa fails to mention in her show is that most regular Joes and Janes also shit brown every single day. And as well as very kindly not shitting on your carpet, we also pay a whopping 20% tax on product to help clean it away. Even so, I reckon most people, myself included, would agree that people like Louisa shouldn't have to pay a pink tax on her essential product, even if she can't be bothered shopping around. By which I mean to imply that a lot of high-profile high street traders now cover the cost of the tampon tax on behalf of their female customers. And although you might have been left with the impression that that Labour MP almost single-handedly shamed the nasty Tories into taking action, the truth is that it was largely time's up for the tampon tax before she even became a Member of Parliament. And indeed, a casual glance over to Wikipedia does helpfully help us to fill in some of the blanks. The United Kingdom was forced to introduce VAT on sanitary products in 1973 in order to comply with rules when it joined the EU. It is set at the lowest possible rate of 5%, and none other than UKIP, the UK Independence Party, made a pledge in their 2015 election manifesto to abolish it entirely as soon as the UK leaves the EU. And months after that election, a nasty Tory Chancellor publicly committed to a zero rate as soon as they could convince Brussels to change EU law, and in the meantime pledged to spend the entire £15 million annually collected on a funding pot exclusively benefiting women-only charities. And only last month, new EU rules have been passed, specifically allowing the UK to scrap the tampon tax entirely. Meanwhile, we're all still paying 20% extra for our non-essential toilet rolls. But never mind that, let's talk about equal pay.
Shall we talk very quickly about what the pay gap actually is? So, in the UK, for every single tenner that men earn, women are earning only £9.03.
Wow.
Okay. And this is across all occupations.
But how is that legal? Like, if I work in Starbucks and then a dude works in Starbucks, we should be on the same hourly rate.
Because maybe coffee shop employees are on the same wage rate, but actually this is the national average. The gaps between men and women in other occupations is so vast that even though they're on equal wages, overall, women are still earning 9.7% less than men are.
Now, again, in fairness to Luisa, her account of the gender pay gap isn't the worst I've ever seen. And she even takes a big breath at the very start to explain the crucial point that the gender pay gap is not the same as paying a woman less money than a man for the same work, which has been entirely illegal since 1970. The trouble is that, predictably enough for the rest of the segment, she goes on to imply that they basically are.
I want to talk about the gender pay gap. The gender pay gap is not the same as equal pay. Equal pay means that if I'm an architect and you're an architect, we should get paid the same for being an architect. The gender pay gaps means general. They add up all the jobs in a company, divided by amount. I don't know, it's maths, you do it. And then they work out a percentage.
If you tell me that of every tenner, I'm losing out on 97 pence, that's going to really piss me off.
That's him getting a free lunch that I have to pay for every day?
Her resident expert makes a not entirely uncommendable effort to explain the complex variables that, in my humble subjective opinion, make gender pay gap calculations to be a relatively meaningless and often misleading affair. But presumably a few of those complex variables must have ended up on the cutting room floor, which oddly enough happen to be some of the most obvious and measurable complex variables that economists point to when explaining why men on average have to pay a lot more tax. One is the type of jobs that people choose to do, and the value that civil society or free markets apply to those different types of work. And the other is helpfully illustrated by the feminist Fawcett Society's annual Equal Pay Day campaign, which last year was set as the 10th of November to raise awareness of the apparent fact that this is the date from which women, metaphorically speaking, work for free for the rest of the year because of the average difference in their average pay packet compared to men. And to mark this, women up and down the country were encouraged to raise awareness by setting their email to explain that they will be out of office until the end of the year. Now, another and arguably more accurate way of saying pretty much exactly the same thing is that, metaphorically speaking, all of the women, as one economic collective, don't earn any more actual pay past the 10th of November because they actually aren't doing any actual paid work. Because it's a fact that men as a comparative economic collective work a considerably larger number of annual work hours, which is the most obvious reason for that bigger average pay packet. Although, in all fairness to the very hard-working women of the United Kingdom, the Institute of Economic Affairs actually estimate that, strictly speaking, those out-of-office replies should be spent much later in the year to raise awareness of the fact that Fawcett's Equal Pay Day campaign estimate the gender pay gap to be 55% higher than the actual figure established by the Office for National Statistics, which last year was estimated to be 9.1% below men's earnings for full-time workers, and conversely 5.1% above men's earnings for those working part-time. Other things highlighted by the IEA's 2017 UK pay gap briefing were that, on average, the women at Louisa's Belfast show got paid more than their men, a statistic that was curiously omitted in Fawcett's Equal Pay Day UK-wide report. And that throughout the entire UK, there's virtually no difference between the earnings of men and women, aged 22 to 39, which, by the way, is the age bracket that Louisa falls into, just about.
Actually, to be honest, guys, I get most of my political views from Instagram memes. So this is
But never mind all that. Let's talk about concerns about physical and verbal misconduct.
There are arguments to say that a lot of men are finding the Me Too movement threatening and it's making dating difficult for them because they can't go up to women anymore. How do you feel about that?
They're guys that use predatory tactics to get women, and now they can no longer use those tactics because we're wise to it and we will call you out. And so they're going, oh, what's happening? This is not, you've gone too far. What is this movement? And it's like, no, your predatory tactics don't work anymore. And that's the only people that are making noise in a bad way about Me Too.
Most men are not offended by this movement. Most men that are normal are not intimidated by this movement. Men that are scared by the Me Too movement are the ones that actually, I don't know, I feel like they're pussies. I feel like most normal people get it.
Personally, I think it's a bit presumptuous of Luisa and her mate to speak so assuredly on behalf of all the blokes of Britain. Especially those blokes who've had crucial evidence withheld from them by the Crown Prosecution Services at an extremely crucial time in their lives. But never mind that.
You know, on Facebook, when everybody had a Me Too story, I didn't want to join in with it. I was like, I don't want to look like I'm jumping on a bandwagon, and also I haven't got a Me Too story.
Really? I could have sworn I'd read something.
And then you realise, oh, if you're talking about getting hollered at the street, or people being patronising to you, or grunting at you, or calling you things, or calling you names, or if they're overly aggressive with you, yeah, I've had that. Everyone's fucking had that.
Oh, well, when you put it like that, everybody's had one of those. But never mind that, let's talk about Luisa's curiously underreported recent moments. And I'm afraid there are no prizes for guessing where it all went down.
Right, you ready? It's going to be a very cool artistic move. No, I need you to look over there. Very professional, ready for work.
Because on the 6th of March 2018, various media outlets began reporting the extraordinary news that a Conservative Member of Parliament had been accused of physically intimidating a female comedian after she tried to interview him for her BBC show. Here's an account from the Daily Mirror. Comedian Luisa Omielan claims that the Shipley MP trapped her in his office at Westminster's Portcullis House by holding the door closed after demanding she hand over the camera her director was filming with. Omielan, who was filming her BBC Three series Politics for Bitches, escaped through a fire exit and described the ordeal in a tearful Facebook live video post. The comedian claimed Davies accused her of having a leftist Corbynist agenda for the BBC after she began asking him questions about homelessness, the NHS and Brexit. Omielan said the MP asked her to turn off the camera and threatened to call BBC director Lord Hall as she quizzed him about cuts to the NHS, which he refuted, saying, "Where are your facts?" And that got me upset. I got tears in my eyes. My mum died at the hands of the NHS because I saw the way she was treated. He held the door in front of me. He wouldn't let me through the door. Omielan's mother died earlier this year. The comedian wrote a post on Facebook at the time claiming she had been failed at every turn by the system. The BBC has been approached for comment about Omielan's accusation, but is yet to reply. Davies has so far not commented on the incident, telling the Daily Mirror only that he had no faith in it accurately reporting his comments. And here's an excerpt from Luisa's very detailed 5-minute account of her encounter just minutes after it occurred.
And he said, give me the camera thingy. And I said, no. I said, I'm not giving you the camera. He said, give me the camera, film camera. So I stole the camera out of my director's hand and I ran out the building with it. I just ran out the building with it. I accidentally hit the girl on the way out, which I'm really sorry for. I hit her with the camera. But I just knocked her on the side. And I ran out, and then he held the door in front of me. He wouldn't let me open the door. Like, he wouldn't let me open the door, so he closed the door on me so I couldn't get out. And I was like, get the out of the fucking way, you dickhead. And I shouldn't have called him a dickhead, but he blocked me in, like he blocked me in his office. And then he was like, are you from the BBC? Are you from the BBC? This is for the BBC. I said, this is for Luisa Omielan. Fuck off. And I ran out the fire exit. So this is Philip Davis, an MP, who's just called me names, made me feel this big.
And here's political blogger Mike Silver with his hot take on what this would all mean if she's telling the truth. If the allegations by Luisa Omielan are accurate, and I have no reason to believe they are not, then Theresa May should make a public apology for the behaviour of her MP Philip Davies, and he should be suspended or expelled. It seems the shame of Shipley not only physically assaulted Ms Omielan, he also apparently tried to steal a BBC video camera and even allegedly tried to unlawfully imprison her in his office. These are all criminal offences. If this was a filmed interview, then the evidence is in the camera Mr Davies tried to take, and Ms Omielan was right to keep it from him. She should take it as evidence to the police and the Speaker of the House of Commons. This means she'll have to make copies, and this would be a good idea in any case, as backup should the originals be somehow lost. Perhaps Philip Davies will change his tune when or if the filmed evidence enters the public domain. Meanwhile, Guardian columnist Owen Jones called on people who are angered by the incident to support a crowdfunding campaign to unseat Mr Davies. And bizarrely, fellow BBC comedian Lenny Henry appeared to call on Twitter for a public lynching of a sitting Member of Parliament. Incredibly, to this day, at least as far as I'm aware, the BBC have never issued an official statement on this very bizarre and very serious turn of events, which, in my humble subjective opinion, is ever so slightly disgraceful, given the ever so slightly different recollection of a number of other witnesses to the event, as reported by the same political blog that were the first to report on the Westminster sex scandal just a few months earlier. A Corbynista comedienne had a public meltdown on the parliamentary estate, called a Tory MP a dickhead, and whacked a young aide with a camera after her attempts to stitch up several MPs for a BBC TV show spectacularly backfired. Luisa Omielan posted a video on Facebook yesterday accusing Philip Davies of shoving her during an interview in his Commons office, claiming she was considering going to the police to accuse him of assault. Guido has spoken to several eyewitnesses who say Omielan's version of events is untrue. One says, and I quote, "He absolutely did not touch her or physically intimidate her. She had two older male members of her camera crew who didn't feel the need to jump in. I'm a woman and I didn't feel the need to say anything. He just told her she couldn't run around the parliamentary estate unescorted and would have to be escorted off. She then told him to fuck off, called him a dickhead, grabbed the camera and ran out." Omielan was filming for a BBC 3 show called Politics for Bitches. Her interview with Davies ended after Omielan asked him how he could be a Tory and a Northerner and started screaming about NHS cuts. Guido understands she applied for a job as a parliamentary assistant at Ben Bradley's office before attempting to bring a camera crew to the interview. Omielan told the Tory MPs she approached that she was not political and didn't know anything about politics. Guido can reveal that to be untrue. Omielan has repeatedly expressed her support for Corbyn and her dislike of the Tories on Facebook, and is even a Labour Party member. A pretty amateurish attempt at a stitch-up. When Omielan made her hasty getaway, Guido understands she whacked a young female aide with her camera. Omielan admits, "I accidentally hit the girl on the way out, which I'm really sorry for. I hit her with the camera." You really have to wonder what the BBC are doing, sending a Corbynista into Parliament to fib to Tory MPs about her political views, swear at them, and then hit their staff. Davies himself responded by claiming he was a victim of a left-wing stitch-up. This was a complete and utter left-wing stitch-up, and anyone reading her accounts can see it doesn't even make sense. I ended the interview, which in itself was extremely insulting about Yorkshire Conservatives, as well as making outrageously incorrect political assertions, and told her that I was going to complain to Lord Hall at the BBC, which I did. I can only presume she decided to get her retaliation in first, because I told her that. Anyway, as an unknown who has manufactured some publicity for herself, she will no doubt consider it a great success. When asked if he categorically denied pushing her and stopping her from leaving, he said, "Yes, of course I do. I should have trusted my instincts as I originally refused her request for an interview. Her production company persuaded me to change my mind by saying it was for the BBC and that there was no particular axe to grind. It was just a chat about politics." After one question, I knew that wasn't the case. And to put this all into some sort of context, This all occurred at a time when Me Too inspired allegations were swirling dramatically all around British politics, and just months after the tragic suicide of a Labour politician over anonymous and unproven accusations, which ultimately led to the resignation of the Welsh First Minister following criticism of bias in the way he handled the affair, and on a parliamentary estate where security procedures had been significantly beefed up after the Westminster Bridge terrorist incident in 2017. Surprisingly enough, all of this incredible carry-on doesn't get a single mention throughout what was thankfully a very short and hopefully final season of Politics for Bitches. Still, while it's fair to say I'm not a fan of her approach to comedy and or politics, it's not like I entirely disagree with absolutely everything she says. So while I leave you with one final thought on the subject of pink-tinted taxes, I'm going to leave Luisa to have the final word.
But we're all only reading the headline.
And do you think that's part of the problem?
It is, because we're not interested in the 3-paragraph article.
It's clickbait. It's just things that they think people are going to want to read. Clickbait, yeah.
And if we're buying into this shit and buying into companies or newspapers, if you're buying them, you're paying into that. We're the only reason that they succeed. We're the only reason that they have all the power that they have, because we buy that shit. Fuck no, bitches. Fuck no. You've got to realise you have so much more power than they want you to think that you do. And collectively, we can do so much more than trying to figure shit out on our own.
Can't you see it too? There's an elephant in the room.